Well, good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the first program in Steep Rock Association's 2026 Winter Speaker Series. Good fire, bad fire. Not all fires are an emergency. Lessons learned from the Steep Rock fire. My name is Brian Hagenbach, and I'm Executive Director of Steep Rock Association. Just some basic housekeeping notes before we start. To keep things running smoothly, please remain muted during the presentation. We honor questions, and if you have any questions, I'd kindly ask that you use Zoom's chat feature found at the bottom of the window. Type your question in and we'll get to it at the end of the talk. Also, please keep an eye out for a short questionnaire we will send out tomorrow. Your feedback is very appreciated, and we're always looking for interesting topics to present. Our 2026 schedule is set up, and you can see our upcoming speaker events on the right side of the screen, starting February 19th. A recording of this presentation will also be posted on our website. Lastly, before I introduce our speaker, my sincere thanks to all of our supporters who have shaped Steep Rock into what it is today. We are a community-based nonprofit organization able to provide these programs free to you because of the generosity of our donors. If you'd like to support our efforts, please visit our website, contact our office, or give us a call. With that, I'm delighted to introduce tonight's topic and speaker. As many of you know, last September, we had a 15-acre brush fire that lasted for a few weeks just below the Steep Rock summit. I want to recognize the incredible efforts of the Washington Volunteer Fire Department, the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or DEEP, and about a dozen other fire stations in Western Connecticut that provided staff, equipment, and resources to fight this fire. The fire did result in both trail and preserve closures. We at Steep Rock were truly humbled by the outpouring of concern and support from our community as we dealt with the fire and we repaired our trails in the aftermath. With a rapidly changing climate, those of us concerned about the health of our forests are quite concerned about the escalating and combined impacts of drought, fire, insects, and human actions that continue to threaten our forest. So tonight's speaker is Michael Kronick, and he knows a lot about these threats. Mike is Connecticut Deep Forest Fire Control Officer for the Western District, and I spent quite a bit of time with Mike at the fire and have been truly impressed with his knowledge and experience working on fires across the country. Mike is an Army veteran, a former firefighter and fire chief, and he now trains and assists firefighters for local responses and to assist the U.S. Forest Service in controlling large fires across the nation. Mike's been on several national wildfire deployments in the West as a member of the Connecticut Interstate Fire Crew. So welcome, Mike, and I look forward to hearing about the past, present, and future of our beautiful Connecticut forests. And I'm going to stop the share. Mike's going to bring up his screen and we'll get started.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Kronick, and bear with me a second. I'm getting closer here to my. There we go. You should see a PowerPoint on your slide. And is that what we got there, Brian? Can you see that?
Yes.
All right. Excellent. So we're going to talk about wildfire. We're going to talk about the wildfire at Steep Rock tonight. We'll start with a little introduction from myself. I'm Michael Kronick. I'm the Fire Control Officer for DEEP on the Western District. I do have one change in my bio, Brian. I am not an Army veteran. I never did serve for the U.S. military. But what I do have is 36 years of career and volunteer fire service. Before coming over to work for DEEP full time, I retired as the fire chief out of Westport, Connecticut. And I've been doing the interstate fire crew and wildfire with the state of Connecticut for about 24 years. Started off as a member of the interstate crew, kind of worked seasonally on and off for DEEP through the years, and I had the great opportunity to be able to come over and work full time for the agency 3 years ago this spring, and it's been a lot of fun. A little about myself, my background, my undergraduate degree is in landscape architecture. So I can show up and look at your woods and tell you they look absolutely horrible, and I can make them look better. But all kidding aside, I do have a good grasp of, we'll call it natural resources, earth science, and the subject and the side fields that I deal with on a regular basis. By no means am I a forester, but I have a good understanding of what I'm looking at. My graduate degree is in public safety and it's in emergency management and public safety management. And I did do that for quite a while. So we're going to get right into it. A little about our program. So the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, Bureau of Natural Resources, Division of Forestry, Forest Protection is responsible for fighting wildfire and supporting fire departments across Connecticut to fight wildfire. We're kind of a mixed source, and bear with me a second. I got to let my wife in the front door. I apologize. Hold on one second.
The benefits of doing a presentation from home.
Sorry about that. So where was I? So we have a group of firefighters that are from the state who are full-time employees. We have seasonal employees that work for the state. And we also have a group of individuals who, for lack of a better term, are emergency hires that we can rely on to help fight wildfire in the state of Connecticut. Hold on one second. I'm on. Hey. So some of the programs we have, and I apologize for the interruption there. So the Forest Protection Program does have a few programs that we do. And some of the things we do are we forecast fire danger every day and we communicate that to the fire departments. We work with the National Weather Service to do fire weather. We do have a forest fire suppression responsibility where we go out and help the fire departments fight fires. We do training for the fire departments. We have a steering committee, the Rural Fire Council, which is a representative group of all the county fire chiefs organizations that we work with to coordinate our programs to ensure they're lining up with the fire department's needs. We do fire prevention. You may be familiar with Smokey Bear. It is Smokey Bear, not Smokey the Bear. He has no middle name. Very successful program, and it's been around a long time. May also be leading to some of the problems we're going to talk about later. We do prescribed fires on state lands. We are planning 6 fires this year, and we are focused on mostly our wildlife management areas at the moment. And we do have a couple of grant programs. Excuse me. One that might be of interest even for the Steep Rock Foundation, and for those of you who may be from other land trusts or working with other communities, we have the Community Wildfire Defense Grants. We do have one of the other fire control officers who helps that, and it's a grant program in which organizations and municipalities can submit for federal grant monies to help do wildfire risk reduction, do training programs, and purchase equipment for those fire departments in those communities. One of the other things we can do is we have our interstate fire crew. It is our export crew that goes out to help other states and parts of Canada. And it's a very active crew, started in the 70s, has a really good reputation. And one of the kind of interesting side notes is, although Connecticut is a small state and not really known for wildfire, our interstate fire crew is well known and well respected at the national level. And we have a reputation of being one of the states that provides a lot of people on a regular basis, year after year, to help support national operations. So a little bit of fire history here in Connecticut, and I have a graph here. And one thing I can say about not just wildland firefighters, but firefighters as a whole, we didn't get our jobs or didn't get into business to be really, really good at writing reports and keeping stats and reporting out data. So we do have a data set on fires. It is very questionable at best. Looking back, the Connecticut Forest Service, or what is now the Division of Forestry, was started, I believe, and it was in 1901. And we do have pretty decent records going back to 1905. And as you can see, the blue line represents the number of fires every year, and the orange line represents acreage. And you'll notice that early on, we used to burn quite a few acres, and then there's a couple noticeable drop-offs. I would argue there's probably a pretty big drop-off post-World War I. A lot of fire departments in Connecticut were incorporated in that time frame, so small rural communities that were experiencing fires that may have burned unchecked. all of a sudden had a fire department that could help stop that. Another big drop was after World War II. Same principle. There's a lot of fire departments in Connecticut. Their incorporation dates are just after World War II. Also, what comes along with that is a increased use of new technologies, whether it's gasoline-driven pumps, more vehicles being distributed to fire departments, or even hand tools. Also, what kind of coincides around it, especially the 1940s, is the discontinued use of steam railroad locomotives. They were a large source of fires. And going forward, you can see starting in the 40s, it's pretty consistent. Relatively low acreage, but the number of fires, if you look at that blue line, is pretty consistent at about 1,000 incidents a year. So one year that I'm going to pick out here, and this was the largest large fire I could find, we'll say near the Steep Rock Preserve. There was a fire that was referred to in some texts and news reports as the Great Taconic Fire of 1930. Started in New York State, burned into Massachusetts and Connecticut. Seen reports that it may have been between 6,000 and 8,000 acres. There was a couple of news reports that ranged from reported Boy Scouts had been killed at the fire from Thomaston, which was turned out to be not true. They were out helping fight the fire, and that there was also another news article, and I believe it was what was the Hartford Courant, is they asked all the boys 18 or 16 years and older from the Hartford school system were put on school buses and were driven out to fight fires. The challenge is these were all newspaper reports, and if you look at the official report from the state forester from that time frame, and I did find copies of it, there's really no mention of this large fire other than the stats you can see on the side there, that in 1930 there were 1,367 fires reported for a total of 55,000 acres. 75 of the fires were over 100 acres, and 8 fires were over 1,000 acres. And the only real reference to this was it said any of the fires that were over 1,000 acres, they actually had contracted for a few $1,000s on each fire to have a surveyor go out and actually survey them to see if they were 1,000-acre fires. Digging through old news reports, as I'm looking here across my notes, there was a large multi-thousand acre in the Colchester area of Connecticut that same time frame, in the Glastonbury, in the Bristol, New Britain, Southington area. So we did have a large fire history, and looking back at the weather for that particular time frame, we know that they were referring to it as a northwest gale was blowing those days. It's hard to determine what or how hard the wind was blowing, but we know we had a pretty stiff wind blowing in those days. But what was interesting is they had record high temperatures at those days. And we know, generally speaking, our fire season for the state of Connecticut, or our typical season of which we experience a lot of fires, is the spring, typically March 15th through green up early May. And that's kind of the time of the year we see a lot of our large incidents. So we kind of fast forward, and this is a little more recent. This is the 2024 fall fire season. We were a little busy. We had multiple fires across Connecticut. We had a flash drought occur. We had, basically, the best way to explain it is on August 18th, we had some record rains, a little bit of south of Steep Rock area, down along the Housatonic River in the area of Oxford, Monroe, near record rainfall. A matter of fact, there's one rain gauge that had reported in an 8-hour period they had received 16 inches of rain. So we went from that on August 18th to late October. We're seeing fires, not unlike this one in this picture, and I believe this one was from Franklin, Connecticut. We had a large number of fires across multiple areas. And one of the interesting things with wildfire is the conditions, whether the weather itself, the fuels, and starts, when we have the conditions where we have alignment where we can actually start having wildfires, those conditions occur across a very broad area. And what happens is we get a saturation of starts, which outpace the ability of the resources to contain those fires. And that's kind of what happened in 2024. Was it a failure of any of the fire departments or a system? No, we were just absolutely overwhelmed with lots of fires across the state, and we don't have a lot of resources in the scheme of things. And this is just a little fire, another fire that was a little bit north of us. This is the fire that was burning in Massachusetts at Butternut Ski area. And just to give you some perspective, this is from Mohawk Mountain looking north. And that smoke was blowing to the south and east. And actually, that day, that fire was putting up enough smoke that it looked just like that down at Sleeping Giant State Park. And we can actually see the smoke drifting over the giant, looking like there was a fire at Sleeping Giant State Park. And some of the challenges we had is we went from record rain to record dry. I believe October of 2024 may have been the driest October on record for the state of Connecticut since they had started keeping records. One of some of the things that were working against us is we definitely have some forest health issues, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. We also have a challenge on the firefighting side, and I'll say from the volunteer fire department side, there's not a lot of people out there anymore fighting fires. And we're fortunate that we do have communities that are still volunteer, and we have a lot of people that are willing to participate, but that number is dwindling. State of Connecticut Fire Academy did some studies with the Department of Emergency Management on Homeland Security. And in the last 10 years, we've lost 67% of the people who fight fires have either retired, disappeared, moved on, gone, done something else. That's a big challenge because there's a lot less people out there now to help fight these fires. This is not California. This is Haddam, Connecticut. This was a fire we had this spring, Easter weekend. And Easter weekend traditionally is a busy time of the year for forest fires in the state of Connecticut. And the best way to explain it is think about that time of the year. We're talking the first beautiful days of the year. If you're a golfer, this is the day you're calling in sick to work to go golf. This is the first day of the year you're looking to wear shorts. The weather is stunningly beautiful. Generally speaking, I would venture to guess that the forecast on these days is 80 degrees or warmer. The relative humidity is low. There's a light wind blowing all day. And under those conditions, especially in the spring, when all our fuels are dry and exposed to the sun, we can get fires. And this is an example, a little bit of an extreme example, but this is a fire that we had this spring. And I want to draw attention to that because we can have these significant fires here in Connecticut. So let's talk about our fire. And this is the Steep Rock Fire. It started, I believe, on September 2nd. Started just below the pinnacle or the peak. And if you look to the right side of it, there's a map that we did on our initial size up. The pins there, don't get worried about that. That's stuff that I put on to keep track and notes for my records. But the red line is essentially our perimeter. And we kind of made a perimeter around this fire of what ended up being 22.43 acres. Not a huge fire in the scheme of things. But it was a fire, and it was in a challenging spot. And Steep Rock didn't get its name because it's a flat site. There's some pretty steep terrain in there, and that's where this fire was burning. And I'm assuming that a lot of you here on this call have some sort of connection or have been to Steep Rock. I have a good friend of mine who lives in Roxbury who's been telling me for years to go hike in Steep Rock, and it was always one of those ones I got to get to. Well, my good fortune did come, but it came with a fire, and I had to do some work. Beautiful piece of property, incredibly steep in there. So just to give you some perspective, the photo on the left, when I arrived on scene of this fire, this is what we saw. Light wispy smoke, gently burning, very high on the slope. This is looking from the river up to the peak. And the one on the right, and it's a little video clip, and I'm hoping it'll play for us. These were the conditions I found when we got to the top as we were doing our size up. And a size up is something we do in the fire world, which is we want to do a 360 of the fire to take a look, see what's going on, and start formulating a plan to respond to this fire and basically get it into a box. So this is some mapping. I cannot take credit for this, and I believe the person who put it together may be on this Zoom today. A good friend of mine, a mentor, somebody I've always looked up to, but he's been a member of our fire crew for a long time. And he comes to us with a really strong fire service background, but he also has a very strong natural resources background. And as a project he had been working on, he started doing some mapping to identify some problems in this area. And what we're looking at is uh, the steep rock on the top, the clamshell in the middle, and we see some polygons that have been mapped. And what we're looking at is these are areas that have been identified as there is some sort of forest health issue. Um, I believe the ones in pink in this location kind of line up with our hemlock stand there, probably identifying woolly adelgid. Some of the black areas might be identifying other disease or mortality related problems with trees. But you can see, looking at this, the fire perimeter encompassed some of these areas. And after we were started working the fire, I went and looked at this particular mapping product, and you can see there's a lot of alignment going on here. We have some south-facing slopes that are very steep. The sun beats down on them all day long, dries them out. We know we had some forest health issues, and then unfortunately, somebody came along and gave us the opportunity of having a fire at this location. The particular map, and I would encourage everybody to look at it. And Brian, I think I will share the link to you, and I know you may have seen it earlier today. But the Connecticut Wildland Urban Interface Intermix Viewer is a great tool, whether you're coming from a fire department, whether you're a land trust, or whether you're a property owner. You can look at that particular mapping product, and there are multiple different layers, and the layers will show properties, the terrain, areas that have been identified with forest health issues by the U.S. Forest Service and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And it kind of starts to paint a picture of some challenges we may have in Connecticut. And this here is one site that when we look at it after the fire, we know we have some challenges. I have the drought monitor, which is a product put out by the National Weather Service and a host of other agencies, which looking at how dry is it? Are we in a drought condition? And I picked this particular date because this is the week leading up to it. So this is something I keep an eye on. A lot of us in the wildfire are always looking at, and it's telling me how maybe how dry it is. And you can see here for the week leading up to the fire we had at Steep Rock, it was not indicating that it was excessively dry. Now, the challenge with drought and looking at drought, we're always looking behind us. It's not today we're looking at 2 weeks ago. And it takes a while. And if we go and cruise to using the US Drought Monitor and look at late September, early October, what we're going to find is that all of Connecticut was abnormal dry, and we actually had a few areas that were in moderate drought condition. So even though the day that we were there fighting the fire in the beginning wasn't a drought condition, we were already dry and heading towards a minor drought condition. Drought also has a challenge for us in that we had a drought in the end of 24. Those conditions persist for years through the fuel beds, through the plants, how the plants behave, how they get their next season's growth going. That also provide us challenges. And this is the same date. This was from, I believe, WeatherBug or Weather Underground. This was actually the departure from normal of the rain for that first week of September. And when we look at this, we can see that good chunk of Connecticut was actually drying out in September. The challenge we have is from a fire perspective, not all fires are bad. And if we can, we like to let the fires burn or burn to a spot where we can control them a little easier than being real aggressive by stretching hose and digging up the forest. And in September, we're kind of threading the needle. We would like to be able to manage that fire and kind of build a box around it and let that fire burn to the box. But if the fire is going to burn for a very long time, I end up, especially as if the fall is going to get drier and we're not going to get rain, where those fires can get kind of out of hand like we had happen in 24. So I got some pictures here. These are pictures that I took of the Steep Rock fire. I've also got some pictures that were given to me from the Steep Rock Association. And what we see here, this is day 2. And a typical fire response for us is local fire department calls looking for assistance, but they give us a call, we're going to come. But that same day, we're only getting a few people that are showing up with yellow shirts to help fight this fire from our agency. We really rely on a swarm of people that we're calling from across the agency to come and help us. And what we like to do is we show up at the fire, we like to size it up, we like to come up with a game plan and then figure out how many people we need. And we were very fortunate being a preserve and a very active preserve. You have a lot of trails in there. And what we're looking at is one of the trails. This trail runs down to the east and ties back into the river down near the clamshell, near the suspension bridge. And when we scouted out the area, we found that that trail is pretty easy to walk. I know I can drive my UTVs on it to help fight fire and control it. And we made the decision to actually take fire and drag it from this peak and bring it along this trail all the way down to the bottom and basically widen this trail by putting a little fire on the ground. And what that does is that allows me to control the place and location that I'm fighting the fire, as opposed to going in and trying to fight it on the steep slopes. And this is a little video clip, and this is the challenge. Although we weren't in a drought, we were seeing a lot of our larger, heavier fuels that are on the ground starting to ignite and be consumed. And what this is telling me is that these fuels are ready to burn. They're very dry, and it is going to be a challenge. And we're going to have to mop this fire up, which is after this fire is contained and has stopped forward progress, we may need to go in and actually split a log like that apart and put out all the fire. And we call that mop up. And we were getting a little concerned after a couple days that we might have some pretty extensive mop up at this location. So here I am. This somebody was able to get a picture of me sitting down. I'm probably looking at my phone to put a map together, but you can see this is the pinnacle. This was kind of where we did a lot of work from, and we worked a lot to the east. We were very fortunate. The fire did not spread to the west. Um, we did have some other challenges with this fire very early on. We had a firefighter who got hurt and hurt really bad at this fire. He attempted to climb down along the cliffs of these cliffs through this area the fire was, and he slipped and got hurt, was hurt very bad. That's why when I was talking about how we're looking for places that it's a little bit easier to control and contain this fire, using an existing trail system that's established is a lot safer than trying to go straight through and work our way down to the river. We did use a lot of hose. We did use a lot of water. Some of the tools we use, and if you look at the photo on the left there, there's an actual sprinkler head on our fire hose. It is a tool we have that makes things a lot easier. As we had the individuals that were working on the burning operation that were going down to the east to tie it back into the river, I worked with a couple other firefighters, and we were able to set sprinklers up on that ridgetop that we could start putting water on that fire's edge. One, to keep the fire from advancing. Two, but it's already starting to do the mop up operation for me. I can let that run all day, and that's going to soak those areas. And it reduces the amount of labor that I need to put into it. The picture on the right with the hose going to what we call a monitor was when the fire kicked up again in late September. So we worked the fire the first couple days. We worked a week to kind of contain it, get it in a box. We were fortunate. We had a pretty good rainstorm. And then myself, a couple of the other fire control staff, and the Washington Fire Department patrolled the fire. So we were keeping an eye on it for the next 2 weeks. And our thought process was we would keep an eye on it for 2 weeks. We weren't seeing any smoke. We weren't finding any hot spots. And we felt if 2 weeks went by and the fire didn't break out again, we were pretty confident we were done. One of the challenges we had was exactly 2 weeks later, it was a Thursday. I was out there looking at the fire. I know the deputy chief of Washington was also out there that day. I know Brian was out there all that day. We all were out there. We saw no smoke, no hint of it. And I live in Stratford, Connecticut. I left there, came home, and literally pulled in the driveway to get a phone call to say, hey, the fire had started up again. Went back up. The fire was burning pretty interior, but it was burning pretty aggressive. And we made the decision on that Thursday not to try to fight it that night. Friday, we kept an eye on it. It picked up again on Friday. And the decision was made is we probably should do something because the leaves are falling. It is getting drier. And what we were concerned is I would have a large fire burning on the property there that I would have to put people and resources back into fighting that fire, but it was getting the conditions were drying out enough across Connecticut that I had to worry about new fires. So we worked with, and Brian had alluded to it, all not just the Washington Fire Department, but all the fire departments of Litchfield County and a couple from Hartford County were a huge help. And what we ended up doing is making some phone calls to get some fire hose that we traditionally don't use on wildfires. We went and got some 3-inch fire hose, which is more for structure firefighting, and we were able to get enough of it from across the region to bring to the location. And we pumped out of a pond on the site on Lower Churchill Road, pumped up and over the mountain, all the way down into the woods, into this monitor. And with this monitor, we were actually able to cover a good chunk of what was burning in those couple of days, put a lot of water on it that allowed us that following Monday, Tuesday to send 2, 3 people with a small portable pump down along the river to go finish mop up and finally put this fire to bed. This is a picture from the fire that somebody gave me from Steep Rock. And if we can look down, you can see the area that burned. It sticks out pretty predominantly there. You can see the pond that we were using to fight that fire. And it was a great asset for us to get a couple of aerial photos and actually some drone photos to get an idea of what was burning, where it was burning, and how it looked. So I'm going to zoom in here. This is a picture from within the burn, and we can see some tree roots, and we can see the areas burned, and we can also see some leaves that have dropped. Got a lot of things going on. This was a late season fire. We're approaching drought conditions, and what we see here is a lot of that duff layer, and we call it duff layer, and it's that layer of decomposing pine needles, hemlock needles, leaves, root, fibrous material, and that's flammable. And what you see there is that hemlock tree stump was covered completely. All those roots were underground at one point, but the fire consumed all those away. And what we have here is the reason we want to make sure we're dealing with these kind of fires, especially as we get into drought conditions and late season drought conditions, is that tree is going to die, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. And what we're concerned with, especially when we start getting into older forests, and I know this particular site has a lot of old and relatively speaking, really old hemlock trees. We do want to protect those because they are of unique value. But what we see here is the material that's holding these trees down, especially on that rocky slope, have burned away. And that's why we want to get in there and try to fight these fires. Whereas if this fire was in the spring, the ground would have still been moist enough that it wouldn't have burned down like that. It would have only burned off the surface fuels. Some good things we see in this, if you can see, there's leaves there. And if you look, there's the dry hemlock needles that have fallen from the fire, and they're not burned. That tells me that that area is burned a while ago and that it's not hot because none of that stuff is burned. And that's a good sign for me. Just another look. And you can see, as bad as the fire may have been in some people's mind, it is not necessarily that bad. Yes, we do lose a little bit of soil, but what we have done is created a disturbance in the landscape that's going to allow new trees to pop up, new trees to germinate, new hemlocks, new oaks on this site will come up. You'll see a lot of the birch trees that were in this area have been killed, but that's going to provide opportunity for other plants to come in. And just another look, this is kind of going down to the east, just as as you go down the trail, there's a kind of a hard right turn to continue on towards the suspension bridge, and this is in that area. And this is the area that we put fire on the ground. So as we drop down in elevation and into the heavier tree canopy, the conditions actually were a lot more moist, and the moisture in the soil there was enough moisture in the soil to not allow this fire to burn down into the soil profile. So what we did is we removed the fuels on the surface. One of the nice things is a lot of times we're hoping this will connect and actually go all the way to the main fire, but this one it didn't, which was a good thing. But what it did is give us a very large buffer that's gonna protect this area. So if the fire conditions did change and we had the fire run at this location, a lot of the fuels that were going to be carrying that fire to the fire's edge were already consumed. So it reduces a lot of risk in the future if that was what was needed. So as we kind of wind down, this is a little drone footage, and it is a few minutes long, but this gives you a good perspective. And this is a late summer fire. It is doing a little bit of damage, but in the end, it's not doing horrible damage. And one of the things, I try to explain, and I explain it a lot with the fire departments, fire on the landscape is not necessarily a bad thing. The things that make it bad are the people, the firefighters that go to try to put it out, the people who have built homes in these areas, the people who have a vested interest or infrastructure in these areas. That's where the challenges come. Because when we start fighting this fire, we're the ones introducing the risk. The fire burns in the woods and nobody sees it. Does it really happen? We know it happens. Interesting, kind of a more of like a long-term fire history. We know Native Americans, First Nation populations, even here in Connecticut, did a lot of burning before the Europeans came here. And there was a long established pattern and fire interval that was created by those peoples. We interrupted it. And one of the things Chris Renshaw talked about in his presentation today. And one of the things I think, even for not just land managers, but even firefighters, despite our best efforts to control a fire, there is a fire interval everywhere. And the fire interval in this part of the country is about 200 to 500 years. And a lot of the areas around here have been settled for 300 years. And if we may not have a good fire history, we may be bumping up against a time where those fires are going to happen despite our best efforts. And as we're kind of swinging around the fire here, we're heading to the west, kind of looking a little to the north and west along the pinnacle there. You can see the fire conditions. And if I remember the timestamp on this particular one, this is on the second day of the fire. So this would be about September 3rd. So as I kind of wind up my part to leave room for us to talk, things that are going to be challenges going forward. And this isn't just for firefighters. This is for all interested parties. Climate change. Regardless of your politics, climate change is here. I've read a couple different stats. One that I've kind of locked onto is for every degree Celsius increase in average temperature, we're losing 15% of what the rainfall is for the year, is kind of not contributing anymore. And I hope that kind of made sense. But if I took away 15% of our average rainfall for here, and I believe for New Milford, it's about 50 inches a year, 15% less rain is a drought. And we might be approaching a time where we may be getting a lot of rain or what looks like a lot of rain, but because the temperatures are up, we're actually kind of running at a deficit all the time. That's going to become a challenge for me because a lot more fuels are going to become a problem. They're dry, they're ready to burn, maybe at times of the year we're not expecting it. So that's a challenge. Forest health issues. Like I said, I got the disclaimer here. I am not a forester by trade, but I do kind of have a good understanding about plant sciences. There's a lot of disease problems and tree health problems coming up, whether it's spongy moth, woolly adelgid, emerald ash borer. Those are ones that have already done damage, and one that's here now that's causing damage now and going to probably take away all our beech trees is the beech leaf disease. Between beech bark disease and beech leaf disease, we all here on this conversation tonight might witness beech trees disappear from our landscape. At some locations in Connecticut, that makes 10 to 15% of the total forest volume might just disappear. That's a lot of trees. Emerald ash borer took away a lot of our ash trees. There are sites in Connecticut where the ash trees, they're gone, they're dead. There's nothing we can do about that. But the trees are still there. They're fuel. Those areas are opened up now to the sunlight. The sun is making it to the ground. It's drying out the fuels and it's providing more opportunities for fire. The dwindling number of volunteer firefighters, I said that's a big challenge. The areas that we're going to have forest fires and wildfires in are the more rural parts of Connecticut. Those are the places that have less people to help fight those fires. Our program is staffed pretty good right now. We have 4 individuals. That's the best staffing we have had in years, maybe not, maybe even a decade or two, but we're still only 4 people. We can only do 4 people's worth of work. The dwindling resources is going to be a challenge. the wildland urban interface. And we really didn't talk about that, but that's a big challenge here in Connecticut. I've seen stats, and one of the ones I like to use is there's a number out there. It says 71% of all the single family homes in the state of Connecticut are in the wildland urban interface. That's a challenge because it's not just a forest fire. I now have to be responsible and work with the fire departments to prevent that fire from doing property damage. Competing environmental concerns. And I work for a very large agency. We do a lot of stuff. And even within our agency, there's competing interests to make things better. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it creates a challenge. And I think one way to explain it is we like to use prescribed fire. Um, we know that it can be used to improve habitat. We can use it for fuel reduction. There's a lot of benefits. One of the bureaus within our agency, the Air Bureau, they're looking at air pollution. So it's a coordinated effort to make sure, one, we're not causing a smoke problem, but I also have some objectives where I got to do some fire control. And maybe the fire control is by doing prescribed fire at certain parts of the year. And the reality is, and the last one here I got, and having worked for government for 30 plus years, um, been in government for 30 plus years, economic crisis every year, regardless of what the economy is doing. There's a competition for very limited resources, very limited number of people, and a limited dollars to do the job. And as we move through time, we have lots of challenges, not only as communities, a state, and a nation, but there's just a lot to be done any given day. And it's a competition for those resources. So how are we going to fix that stuff? How can we improve things? I'm going to be honest, it's a mindset, whether it's me as a fire control officer working with my brother and sister firefighters across multiple different agencies to go out there and do good work, suppressing fire and do it safely. For me, and I know for a lot of people in public safety, it's about relationships. And Brian, I'm glad I met you guys. This is a great relationship start for me. I know it's going to open up multiple other doors, not only for myself, but the other fire control staff. Relationships, having them and building on them, and just even knowing who people are and what people do makes it easier for me when I show up at a new location to help fight a fire. Knowing a lot of the firefighters across Western Connecticut and the fire officers makes it easier for me to do my job. And now having the connection to work with with a bunch of land trusts and different organizations, that helps. And we all have to have the collective will to want to fix the problem. I'm going to quote somebody today. He said, if we can predict it, we have a moral responsibility to prevent it. We know what sites in Connecticut are going to be a challenge. We need to address it. We need to work with the fire departments, the land trusts, the landowners, the homeowners to kind of be prepared to deal with fire. That takes collective will, and we all need to be moving and pulling in the same direction. And I'm going to leave with this last shot. And I like this last shot because this was the last day I was at Steep Rock. This is October 28th. This is when I called the state forester and said, this fire is done. We're good. And I ended up sitting up there watching and looking. And I like looking across Connecticut. And I think Connecticut gets a bad rap. Connecticut is a beautiful state. It's a small state. And, you know, I think New England as a whole kind of gets a bad rap. I've heard the term used, the land of steady bad habits. But we've been here for a while. And I look across this property, and I know we're looking kind of like south and west from it. It is a stunningly beautiful view. This is what gets me up in the morning. I like working here. I like doing this kind of work. I like protecting things that other than houses, and I enjoy it. I'm hoping I gave you all a little something here, and I'm hoping you all have some questions for me.
Thank you, Mike. That was a terrific presentation. Really looking into the depths of the fire itself. I like that historical perspective that you offered as well. And I do have a couple of questions here, but I'm going to take the liberty as the host to ask the first one, and that is kind of predicting the future of our forest. And I'm really thrilled with this wildlife urban interface viewer and how it's correlating some of the historical patterns of damage to our forests with the impacts that we're seeing now. 10, 20, 30 years from now, or even further, for us who manage land, what do you see? What are our big challenges, and what do you see for the future if these species are moving out or are more moving in with the climate change? I mean, it's a broad question, but I'd like to just pick your brain on it.
So I'm going to quote a line from a book that I like. It's called Deep Survival. It was written by Lawrence Gonzalez. And one of the lines in there in that book, and it's so true. And coming from a public safety background, I really do appreciate it. And the line is, things that never happen seem to happen all the time. And what I what I'm saying there is we should expect the unexpected, and we can look to the past to kind of see what could happen. The past is a guide to what we might see, but we really can't predict the future. I think it's safe to say we have some serious challenges coming up. Um, just from a climate change perspective, the U.S. Department of Agriculture adjusted the climate zones for plants, the plant hardiness zones, a couple of years ago. Um, One of my favorite plants is crepe myrtle. I have crepe myrtle growing in Connecticut. I know I can grow southern magnolias in a lot more sites in Connecticut now. With that shift, we should assume not only to see a lot of plants disappear from Connecticut's landscape over the next, we'll say 10, 20, 30 years, we should expect new plants to show up. We might be basing assumptions and planning to deal with fires that existed in the past. That might not be what we see in the future. In introduction of invasive species, or what we are seeing as an invasive species or a new species to this location, which may become naturalized, may also come with a fire problem. Um, you look to the south of us, you start to see more oak hickory forests, and oak hickory forests tend to have fire more frequently than like a maple beech forest. So we may be looking at a situation where we will see large scale fires take away what we see today, replace it with something new that's a little bit more reliant on fire and a little bit more frequent on fire. Um, that being said, we always got to be looking up and out, see what the problems are, and be prepared to deal with them and respond. I think from a land trust or a land agency, working with your foresters within your own group, working with the state service foresters, and working on a plan to take opportunities if fire presents itself on your site. We're going to let this area burn because we know it's going to kind of clean it up and make room for new wildlife, new plants to show up. But we also have to be prepared to suppress fire to keep it from becoming a problem. And it's being
Yeah,
flexible enough to know we have to do both at the same time.
great. Let me jump to some of the questions that came through. You may have alluded to this later in the presentation, but one of the questions was, how'd you get the water there?
Uh,
I know that
so
I know that when you had the flare up, they dumped almost 1 million gallons of
so it
water.
was like about 750,000 gallons over 2 days. Washington Fire Department was able to put a fire truck at that pond, and we were actually able to supply that 3-inch hose line and pump it up over the top of Steep Rock. And there's a little bit of math, and this is probably one of those times where algebra could save your life, but doing a little friction loss calculations and fire flow calculations and knowing where we were working and that we were about 30 feet lower than the pond surface elevation, we knew that that fire truck could not only supply the water, but supply it at a sufficient enough rate to power that device to throw the water downrange to fight that fire. And we burned a lot of diesel fuel. That fire truck pumped for 8 hours, a Saturday and a Sunday, but it made the mop up non-existent there. It was myself and two firefighters from Washington were able to handle that operation all day Saturday and Sunday.
Great, great. Um, I know that we also had that first weekend, we had about an inch of rain that really helped suppress the initial fire. Ironically, the storm that dumped that rain, when it got over to our Hidden Valley Preserve, we had a microburst that took out about an acre of trees. So on one hand, it was a good storm. On the other hand, it was not a good storm for us. I know a lot of people have asked me about the cause of the fire. Can you speak to that?
Um, it was so I'm going to frame it in generalities. It was human caused. We'll leave it at that. Was it willful negligence? Absolutely not. It was probably good people thought they were helping out. Um, and that's a challenge. Almost, I would say, I think the stat for Connecticut is 98% of all our wildfires are from human causes, whether it's unattended campfires or if they didn't put the campfire out fully. Um, Open burning of brush is a big source. Um, and then something as simple as power lines. And I know the utility companies get a bad rap. I will stand by this. Eversource absolutely stood up and like was rock solid for us in the fall of 24. Every power line that fell, They were there fast to turn off the power so we could put that fire out. We know that that's a challenge. And that's not just a challenge here in Connecticut, that's a challenge across the United States. Our power infrastructure is aging. It needs to be modernized. It needs to be hardened. And that's not just coming from a wildfire perspective. I worked for a municipal fire department, and every time the wind blew, trees and wires came down, and it was always a disaster. Um, the give there might be, hey, I live on a street and there's trees there. When the power company comes through, let them prune them. It may reduce not only the risk of fire, but you will have your power on more frequent. It is a effort, and it goes back to that mindset, the relationships, and the collective will. We all got to be pulling in the same direction to make improvements. We do have a little bit of history of a couple lightning fires here in Connecticut. Up in Cornwall, we did have a lightning strike fire in 2016, and that fire burned, I believe, we'll say 300 and 350-ish acres. Started in September, went till January. We did that more as a managed fire. Did create a little bit of a smoke problem in the upper Housatonic Valley, but long term, we knew it was the right thing to do.
Great. Thank you. Do you have a status of the injured firefighter?
He is good and he's on the mend, but it was a pretty serious injury. And, my cautionary tale, especially with the firefighters, when I do the teaching or instructing for fire departments, I need you all to go home. There are other emergencies that need you. Your family needs you. I've worked in the business a long time. I don't know how after 37 years I've managed not to have a significant injury, and knock on wood. Uh, but it happens. It's not acceptable, but unfortunately it does happen. They're inevitable injuries. He is on the mend. He will be fine.
That is definitely good news. We still have a few minutes. I got a couple of questions here. If people have questions, you can put them into the chat box and we will get to them. Um, and this question, actually, I'm going to point out who gave it to me. It's Melissa Schipple. Melissa is one of our Steep Rock star volunteers. She's also a pilot, and she took that photo from her plane that you were able to see.
That's an
So
awesome
kudos to
photo.
Melissa. Melissa is asking if you have suggestions for Steep Rock as far as management of future fires. And I'll add a corollary there, because one of our emphasis as land managers is trying to build forest resiliency, climate resiliency in it. So are there kind of steps that we can build into our management plans to try to reduce these impacts or prevent them?
Um, the answer is yes. One, and we'll start with something simple, making sure access to the property. So when there is a fire, we can respond. And I know that's something that the fire department brought up with you, but and you were already in the process, I believe you had a contractor lined up to do some work on that trail. That's a big improvement. One, I can use those trails as fire control lines. I can use it to gain access. That trail was big enough and sufficient enough to get in there with a UTV. That's a huge. And then I think, as some other things, maybe from a forestry standpoint, maybe working with a forester and doing some selective harvest. And I know that kind of might be counterintuitive for a good chunk of this group. Doing some release cutting, maybe removing selectively. I'm not saying clear cut. I'm not talking going in and, Georgia Pacificing this whole site. I'm talking about going in and doing some selective work, some selective sites, and taking away a little bit of risk. What comes with that is, now you're introducing disturbance. You're going to allow a section of the forest to kind of regrow, some new growth. If we do sign a selective harvest and prescribe firework in conjunction together, songbirds that hadn't been at that site will return. Plants that we haven't seen in a long time return. There's a lot of opportunities there. The caution would be as, if we're doing, let's say, mechanical work. A lot of places and individuals would like to use, we'll say, mechanical vegetation management. We're going to do, a fecon mower or a big brush mower. The challenge is we may be reducing the threat, but we're changing it. We may be adding a lot of material to the ground that's chipped and ready to burn in the near term, but maybe it's not as severe of a fire. And I think that's one of those ones where, as a land trust and you're stewards of the land, finding an expert that can come in and look at your site and work on a plan with you and address that through your forest action plan to look for those opportunities, one, to reduce risk, but two, to also improve your forest in both health and quality.
Well, let me add to that, because the USDA's NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, does have small grants available to nonprofit organizations and even to private landowners that they can do forest management plans. And in these forest management plans, they can address some of these issues and how to enhance the resiliency of the forest. We recently had a grant and just completed it for a forest management plan for our entire Hidden Valley Preserve. And we've got about 5 years worth of projects now to enhance that resiliency. Um, One of the things you pointed out was the overall health of the forest. We've got all these dead ashes. The beaches are on their way out. We're going to have a lot of tinder. We're going to have a lot of fuel for these fires. As a land manager, should we be considering removing some of these to reduce that threat? And I know the ecological value of dead verticality, but is this something that we should think about in fire-prone areas, that we remove some of the large scale fuel that might be there because of these insects and diseases?
Uh, you know, I'm going to be honest, I don't know. I don't know what the correct answer is. I know from a reality standpoint, to remove that much material, even off a smaller forest, let's say your size, and when I say smaller, I don't mean to be discounting the size of the Steep Rock Land Preserve there, but when you talk about landscape size projects that have been done nationally, especially like compared to the Western United States, I don't think even Connecticut, we couldn't probably find a contractor to do thousands of acres of work, let alone hundreds of acres of work. So from that perspective, I don't know if it's feasible. But I think what you're probably doing again is going back to site specific locations, maybe the edges of your property areas where there's intense use, where maybe that tree falling might hurt somebody or kill them or do property damage. Maybe near parking areas and entrances, we go and do that work. Or at the edge of the property near utility right of ways, where if a fire did start, we're minimizing the risk of it spreading quickly. But as far as going, deep into the remote parts of your property and removing dead and dying trees, I don't think we can do that. And I don't think that probably is a long-term solution because you're always going to be chasing that. And then all of a sudden you end up with a clear-cut site. And I think it's kind of like, got to let nature do its thing, but be prepared to do site-specific work to address those problems.
Okay, great. We have run through our questions. Mike, I wish we would have met under better circumstances and that we had just met on top of the Steep Rock Summit one afternoon on a hike. But it's been incredible to work with you on the Steep Rock Fire and your presentation tonight and the knowledge and the wisdom that you shared with us. Not just for Steep Rock, for our other land trust and land managers out there. I want to thank everybody who attended. And on the right side of the screen is our upcoming speaker series. February 19th, we're going to look at Washington's agricultural heritage with Patrick Horan. On March 19th, we're going to have a talk about bobcats with Paul Colburn. And on April 16th, a look at nativars as we start to look at what we're planting in our garden. And that's with one of our trustees, Chris Koppel. So with that, I want to thank everybody for attending. I super thank you and debt of gratitude to Mike for his incredible presentation tonight. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you all again in the near future when it's not a fire.
There you go, Mike. Thank you.